Today we're going to make a shaker card that was inspired by Carolyn Bosley. She is a fellow demonstrator and she is part of the North Carolina Demonstrator Group. Recently on a stamp-along event, she demonstrated a shaker card that she made with this technique, and I am copying her. So Carolyn, thank you very much for the card that you made. Hers had a snowman and some trees in the background. Super, super pretty. One of the really nice things about a shaker card like this is it is thin. So it can be put into a standard envelope, and you can see it still shakes. The sequins that I have inside here do move when the card moves. If I bring in some other shaker cards that I've made, you can see that they are much bulkier. They are much more difficult to mail because they do have a little bit of extra width to the card. These ones will be very simple to put into the mail. And they don't have a lot of pieces that you need to cut out to make the card. In fact, the pieces that you need: card base, standard A2 size, 8.5 by 5.5, scored in the middle at 4 1/4. A piece of designer series paper, your choice of color. I have seen a lot of Christmas cards lately that have the poinsettia petals stamps and dies, and a lot of the flowers are done in gorgeous blues. And I decided that I wanted to copy the color scheme in the card that I made. So I'm using some blues to make the poinsettia, and I really think it pops. Also, you're going to need a piece of cardstock, and this is the one that you're going to stamp on. Mine is cut to 3 1/8 by 4 3/8. And the reason it's cut to those measurements is I'm using a clear envelope from Stampin' Up, and I am going to put that piece, once it's stamped, into the envelope. And I just need to make sure that I have a little bit of room around the side so that that piece of paper will not be super snug, but also will be close enough to the edges so that the sequins that I will end up putting inside that bag are not going to be able to escape around the back of the piece that I'm going to stamp on. And then I have a sentiment that I've already stamped and die cut. And I have a little bit of an embellishment that I will put on the finished stamp or finished card. And I just grabbed some sequins that I have in my stash, and I'm going to put some of those inside the envelope to get shaken. So let's go ahead and start on this. And the first thing I'm going to do is simply attach the designer series paper to the front of the card. And the designer series paper is purposely cut 1/8 inch less in width, 1/8 inch less in height than the A2 card. And that way there's a nice 1/16 inch border around the designer series paper. So it just gives you a little bit of a frame for the card. And yet again, I am using some of the designer series paper from the Plaid Tidings set. I really love the color combinations, and there's so many colors in this particular plaid. Really allows you to play with some of the inks that I'm going to use on the stamping. So if I bring in the finished card, you can tell that I used the Poinsettia Petals stamp set, and I used a couple of the stamps that are in here. I've used the multi-petal poinsettia. I used each of the leaves, and then to color in where you see a little bit of blue and green, I used the pieces that look like an abstract scribbling sort of. these three, 2 for the leaves and 1 for the poinsettia. And I've already got my Stamparatus set up with the stamps. So I'm going to bring that in. And I have said this before, but there is no way that I would be able to stamp without this Stamparatus. I use it all the time. And it has definitely become one of the go-to pieces that I have. And I am just going to put in my piece. I tend to set the piece off a little bit. I don't stuff it in the corner. I like to have just a little bit of room so that I can put the paper where I want it to be. And you can see that I've put the poinsettia piece on the bottom of this plate. I've also already put the leaves, and I have this set up so that I know that those leaves are going to go exactly where I want them to go. On my other plate, I have more stamps set up. I have the middle of the poinsettia already set. And then because I can turn this plate around, I have the middle of the leaves already set. So this is a really big benefit of the Stamparatus versus some of the other stamping tools that are on the market. This allows multiple stamps to be used at the same time and set up for a production kind of process. Now, the colors that I used, I decided that I was going to have 2 shades of blue for the poinsettia. It's a little hard to see the different shades, but I have the 2 blues actually playing in the flower. And then I came back and I put Seaside Spray in the middle. So I'm using both of these blues, Misty Moonlight and Pretty Peacock, to stamp the flower itself. And then when I come back and fill in where the lighter blue is, I'm using the Seaside Spray color. And then for the leaves, I am going to be using Shaded Spruce on the outside. And then on the inside, I'm going to put in some Garden Green. And again, I've kind of cheated on this. I apologize for that. But I already had everything set up. And I am going to start in by using my Misty Moonlight. And I am stamping the poinsettia stamp off to the right of the screen. And then I'm going to bring that in. And I'm going to give that a nice stamp there. And I purposely have put it so that some of the flower pieces, the actual petals, are going to go off the side of the card. And that's how I wanted it. It's really up to you, however you would like to have your design work. And then I wanted to add just a little bit of additional highlight. And I'm using the Pretty Peacock. And I'm just going to randomly kind of touch on parts of the petal and then bring that stamp back in. And what that's going to do is, it's a little hard to see on camera, but there are different kinds of blues that are showing on here. It's not all the same blue color that is just represented by one of the blue inks. Now, it's a little hard to see in the final card that I did, but I did some masking. And this is something that you can do, you don't have to do. It adds a little something to the design, but I wouldn't really go crazy over it because your design will look just beautiful with or without masking. But if you haven't done masking before, what you want to do is you want to create the same design on a piece of Post-it note or a piece of copier paper, and then put a little bit of two-way glue on the back, or if you did it on a Post-it note, you're going to have that stickiness already on the back. And then what you can do with your mask is you literally put it over, directly over what you've already stamped. And then what that will do is it will allow me here, this is where you can really see it. I'm going to stamp the leaf, and it is going to look like it is behind the flower, because I'm actually going to stamp the leaf right on top of this Post-it note. So the most important thing to remember is when you do masking, you do it from the front back, which is kind of weird, but whatever your front image is going to be is the one that you're going to mask, and then you're going to stamp the pieces that go in the background after that. And the pieces that I'm now going to stamp, I'm now going to stamp the outline of the leaves. And I am going to use a shaded spruce to do that. And again, off the camera, but you saw it a couple minutes ago, I have the stamps already set up, and I'm just inking those up with the shaded spruce. I'm going to come in with those, and I'm going to stamp that down. And if I wanted to do another pass with the ink, I could go ahead and do that, but I'm happy with where that is. So the other two parts that I'm going to do to finish off the stamping for the inside, I want to add some blue to the inside of the poinsettia flower. And then I want to add some green to the inside of the leaves. And again, I have the stamp set up, and I'm going to use the Seaside Spray for the inside of the poinsettia. And for the inside of the leaves, I am going to use the Garden Green. Well, let's think about the order that we need to do this. We need to do the leaves first. And the reason is part of the leaf stamp that I'm going to use that will fill in the color is actually going to overlap my mask. So if you look here, this is the inside of the color for that leaf. And if I were to take the mask off right now and stamp this down, then part of the inside color for the leaf would actually get stamped inside my flower. I don't want that. So I want to stamp the inside of the leaves first, then I'll take the mask off, and then I'll stamp the inside of the flower. So again, I'm going to use Garden Green, and I am going to ink up the stamps for the inside of those leaves. And whatever design you are choosing for this piece will look fabulous. You will find that this kind of design, this kind of shaker card, is one that will look really pretty for many, many occasions. Looks great for birthday cards, for Thanksgiving, anniversaries, whatever you would like to use. And you can see that if I had pulled this up, this mask up, I would get some of that green in this flower. That is not what I wanted. I wanted to make sure that the actual leaves were really showing as if they're in the back. But now I can take that middle flower piece, I can ink that up with the Seaside Spray, and I can put that piece and those colors right in the center of the poinsettia. And this is just, I think, a fun color combination. It is definitely different for Christmas. It's not the typical red or pink poinsettia that you see. There are some really fun colors, and the blues add a lot in terms of a nice winter combination. So the next thing that I want to do, I have my stamping done for the poinsettia, but I wanted to add just a little bit of a yellowish to the inside, right in the middle. And it's very, very subtle. You can barely see that. And I'm going to use one of the new in colors. It's Bumblebee. And the marker, I'm taking the side that is the brush side, and I'm just kind of dotting that in. And I'm dotting it rather than taking it and using it like a marker, because I just want to have a little bit of color. And if I dot that in, I can control the color a little bit more. So there we have it. There is the stamped poinsettia that is going to go inside the clear envelope. But I'm going to do one more thing with this piece before I put it into the envelope. And it's very subtle, and it is an embossing folder. I am going to use the Tasteful Textile 3D embossing folder. And I'm just going to put a little bit of interest on that particular piece. And this has become one of my favorite 3D embossing folders. It is really subtle. It has a really nice pattern. And it's also one of those embossing folders that you can't mess up in terms of how you place the paper. You don't have to worry about having the paper perfectly straight, anything like that. And remember, when you put this through your die cutting / embossing machine, the 3D embossing folders are different from the regular embossing folders as far as the sandwich. So I'm going to be using, this is an old plate base, but I'm pulling it so that tab 1 is showing. And then my sandwich is going to be the embossing folder with the paper in it. And then I am putting on the 3D embossing plate. And this plate, the one that I have, is retired. However, there is a new one that is available, and it is in the new catalog, and it works exactly the same way. So because the embossing folder is thicker than the normal embossing folders, you don't need to have 2 plates to run through your embossing machine. You just need the one, and you will get an amazing texture. So when I take this out, you can see it almost looks like a fabric. It is just really, really pretty and has a really nice pattern to it. I'm going to add a little bit more interest to the embossing part. And what I'm trying to do is pull in some of the color that is in the plaid. And I really like the Seaside Spray color. It is one of the blues that is in the plaid. It's the lighter blue. I'm going to grab a blending brush, and I'm just going to add a little bit of ink. And I'm not going to overdo this, but I wanted to, rather than have white, stark white as a background, I wanted to have a little bit of blue. And I'm also going to be adding in some snowflakes into the mixture of the sequins. And if I have a little bit of a blue background, those snowflakes are going to show up just a tad better. So I am not putting a lot of ink, a lot of pressure on here. And I'm also not going to take a lot of time to do this. I want it to be a little bit random. So just adding some interest on here. Getting some of the ink off the brush before I go onto the paper so that it doesn't show really concentrated color. And as I'm doing this, I'm thinking that another really, really pretty way to do the inside for this kind of shaker card would be using watercolor paper. And I know that this stamp and many others look really beautiful if they're done with watercolor, and they would be stunning inside a clear bag for a shaker card. So I'm just about there. Just want to make sure that at least I have a hint of blue pretty much on the different parts. And I'm just about happy with this. And again, I'm not going for perfection. Just wanted to add a little bit of color to the background. The other thing that I did to get ready for finishing up this card is I have some garden green cardstock, and I use the Pretty Peacock ink. I stamped Merry Christmas from the poinsettia petals onto the garden green cardstock. And then I used one of the rectangle square dies that comes from the Ornate Layers die collection. And I cut this out. I cut it out so that the Merry Christmas, the words, were over to the right. And I did that intentionally because I am going to add a little bit of a bling to this. And I wanted the words to be offset to the right so I could add my bow to the left. And I've put the bow together as well. So we are at the point where we're going to assemble. And this is where you are going to find, if you haven't made these kind of shaker cards before, that you're probably going to think and just love the way that this comes together, because it is a very straightforward process, and it really is a lot of fun. All right, if you grab your bag, I am using a Stampin' Up! Clear envelope. And whatever you use, I do strongly recommend that you have 3 sides that are sealed, 1 side that is open. And the cardstock that you've stamped on, we talked about this a little bit earlier, but you want to make sure that when you put that piece into your envelope, that you're pretty snug at the edge. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to put this into the envelope. This is going to become my shaker for the shaker card. I do not need the excess on this side, and I am going to cut from the end of my card about 1.25 inches is what I'm going to leave over on this side. So I'm going to grab my cutting board, and I am just going to measure about 1.25 inches. And the way to do that is to put the piece, the edge, right about at 1.25 inches, so right here. And then I'm going to cut that edge off. And this is now excess. You can actually toss that. You will not need it. The other thing that I'm going to do in preparations of making this into the shaker is I want to trim the edges just a little bit, because when I fold this back, I don't want to have a ton of bulk on the sides. And the edges don't need to be the same on both sides. You just want to cut a little bit of a diagonal, and don't get it all the way down to the edge of where your card is. Leave a little bit of space there. And what we're eventually going to do is we're going to wrap this around, and we're going to adhere that to the back. But before we do that, of course, you want to add whatever you're going to need or want to have inside so that it shakes. And this is really personal preference. If you like a lot of stuff in your shaker cards and you really want to fill it to the brim, you can. My preference is not to have a ton, but to have some pieces that will move around to show that it is a shaker card. And I've decided to take an assortment. So I'm going to take a pinch, not scientific, but a pinch, and throw it into my bag on the front of what I have actually stamped. And then I'm going to take a couple more. These are just fun. I like these green ones because they definitely show. And I think I'm going to throw in a couple of these really pretty big snowflakes. And I'm going to make this one a little different than the first one I did. Put in a few silver sequins just because I want to. And then I'm going to test drive this. One of the most important things that you want to do is to make sure that this envelope has room enough so that you can shake it. And you're going to test that. You're going to wrap the envelope around the back and kind of hold it. And make sure that when you move the card, that things shake. Let me show you what happens if you hold this too tight. So if I really pull this around and I try to make it as tight as I can, it will not shake. These are not going to move. So you want to make sure that when you wrap this around the back, that you leave a little bit of room. I don't know if you can see that on the right, but I'm leaving a little bit of room so that these are going to shake. They're going to move. All right. And then using the magic of tape. So I'm just going to wrap this around. I'm definitely leaving some room on the side. And I'm going to test this before I commit to it. This is another beautiful thing. I'm going to put a little bit of tape on the back. And then I can come around the front and I can see, are those going to move? And I can tell that these are a little stuck, but now I'm getting them to move around. So they're getting there. I think I'm going to give that a little bit more breathing room. So I'm going to untape this and I'm going to give it just a little bit more room on that side. And this is where you really want to test and make sure that things are moving. Now they're moving around. So I'm much more happy with that. Well, if I were to put this on the front of my card right now, the right side is going to be sticking up. You definitely don't want that. It's actually not flat against the table. There's an easy way to fix that, and it's involving a bone folder. So when you get your shaker piece to the depth that you want, and you have attached the tape on the back, the next thing you want to do is to try and get your envelope as flat as you can. And the way to do that is to really just hold it down. And mine isn't square, so I'm going to square it off too and see if I can get that as square as I can get it. Push this down, and I'm going to take my bone folder and I'm going to literally give this a nice crease. That is going to do two things. It is going to make this lie flat, which is exactly what I want it to do. Plus, it is going to just give this more room for everything to move around. So you can see that these are moving much more freely than they had been. And you can go to the back as well and just give it a nice push. And then you have your shaker card encased. And these are definitely moving around. To get the shaker attached to the front of your card, what I suggest that you use is tear and tape or two-sided tape, this kind of adhesive. A couple of things on this is I really recommend that when you put that tape on, that you don't go all the way to the edge, that you concentrate a little bit more in the middle. And here's the reason why. If you put the tape all the way to the edge, and then you put your piece down on top of your card, you may see a little bit of the adhesive right on the edge of that bag, and you don't want that. You don't want to see adhesive on the edges. You don't want to see anything on the edges. You want to have just the background of your paper. So when you do the tear and tape, or whatever adhesive you want, you can definitely use glue. It will definitely work. Put the tear and tape more toward the center. Leave some space on the outside. It will work just fine. It will hold it down without a problem. And it will also make sure that you cannot see the adhesive behind your paper. When you do this, make sure that you put some tear and tape right over the edge of your flap, so you can make sure that that is not going to come up. You definitely don't want that to come up and have any risk of any of the sequins to pop out. So again, you can see that I just put that tear and tape kind of on the middle-ish area so that it won't come up. And then I'm going to take the wax off the back. This is definitely sticky stuff. And you could put dimensionals behind here too and give a little bit more height. I recommend that you use something that will adhere your envelope flat to the front, because you might want to add a little bit of height when you put some more embellishments. I'm just making sure I know which way the card is opening. I am making sure I know which way my design is on the card. And then I am actually standing up and I am looking at the bag. I'm trying not to look at the paper. I'm looking at the bag and I am just attaching that and giving a little bit of push on the bottom. And now it might take a couple times to get this to move, but you can see that things are moving around. And then you can add some bling or some design to the top if you want. And the two pieces that I decided I wanted to add were a sentiment. And I put that sentiment up toward the top. I could put it all the way to the top of the bag. I wanted to have a little bit of that design showing of the embossing. So I pulled my sentiment down just a tad. And then I also had a double bow that I made on a bow maker. And this is some ribbon from last year from Stampin' Up. And I just did it in a double bow. And I don't know why, but I really like the effect of having a bow kind of come over the front with the tails, one tail in the back, one tail in the front. And these are simply taped on. The tail in the back is taped on. I will put a glue dot on the tail in the front when I get everything put down. And then I am going to use dimensionals to tack this down. And this is where you have a choice. The bag itself has a little bit of height just because it has layers to it. And I could put dimensionals just on the side and that would work. What I did on the original card is I put dimensionals behind the sentiment and I popped it up. And you can do that as well. It gives it kind of a nice curvy feel. I think I may do this one just a little differently and just put dimensionals on the side and put it down that way. And we all know the trick of cutting dimensionals in half so you can get more mileage. Or you could use the mini dimensionals in this case. And we also know that every single little piece of dimensional is something that you want to use. The edges are just as sticky as the middle. And I'm going to go ahead and just tack that down. And this will give it a nice height in the front and a nice little finish. Obviously, you could picture this with the birthday greeting or get well, happy anniversary, whatever sentiment you would like. And again, I'm just going to stand up so that I can get this as aligned as I would like, hopefully. Leave a little bit of the top showing and then go ahead and put that down. So you can see the difference. The one that I did originally has a little bit more of a bow on the front, and this one is flush to the front. Now, the other thing that I like to do is I like to add just a couple of sequins to the top. So this sequin here, this silver, and this snowflake were added to the top so that they will always be there. There will always be a little bit of a bling effect on the card. And then I trimmed the tails of the bow. And I also stuck a glue dot underneath this tail to hold it onto the top of the sentiment. But there you go. And these shaker cards they're fun. They're pretty quick. You could definitely do these in an assembly line. And the really great news is that they're nice and thin and will fit into a regular envelope for mailing. And there you have it. A clear envelope shaker card, a little bit of masking on the stamping and a little bit of bling, and a really pretty Christmas card that I will definitely be making more of to send to family and friends. And that is it.